The story happened when I was 13. My parents wanted to buy a house in a quaint village in South Carolina. We went to look at the property, which was completely abandoned. The house was dilapidated, the yard was overgrown with grass, and the ground was cracked from the drought. But as soon as we looked up, there was a magnificent sight. A huge cherry tree with strong roots and spreading branches in the middle of the yard. I had never seen such a huge tree before. It seemed to hold many secrets and stories. However, it looked like the tree had withered away. We decided to buy this abandoned lot, rebuild the house, and plant a garden. By spring, the house was ready, and by the end of May, we moved in permanently. The village greeted us with the chirping of birds, the scent of lilacs, and that mysterious cherry tree that had blossomed in our absence. One evening, our neighbor Aunt Barbara came to visit. She was a plump, middle-aged woman with a kind face. She brought a strawberry cake and gave it to us for tea. We all sat on the old wooden porch in rocking chairs, drinking fragrant tea and admiring the setting sun. At one point, Aunt Barbara, looking at our cherry tree, said that this was the first year in many years that it had blossomed and even borne fruit. It is as if the tree came to life with the arrival of the new owners and is now enjoying itself with you, she said with a smile. My mother took the opportunity to ask the neighbor about the previous owners of our house. It turned out that there was a strange old lady named Agatha who died a few years ago. Aunt Barbara told me that Agatha was very private. She didn't leave the house unless she had to, and she didn't let guests in. She had an unsociable temperament and a piercing X-ray-like stare in her dark eyes. Despite her advanced age, Agatha had extraordinary strength and stamina. She carried heavy sacks of potatoes from the garden. When Aunt Barbara got to the details of the old woman's appearance, I left the table so I wouldn't have to listen to horror stories before going to bed. After my neighbor left, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed until I suddenly heard a cracking sound coming from the window. I quietly walked barefoot to the window and carefully looked out. At first, everything seemed calm and quiet in the moonlight. But then I noticed a cherry tree, its branches swaying slightly despite the lack of wind. I looked up and noticed that one of the thicker lower branches was slowly leaning toward the ground, as if under the weight of someone else. There was another cracking sound. Someone was clearly trying to climb the tree, clinging to the branch. I shrieked in fear, and the branch rebounded and jumped straight up. I stood at the window, staring out into the darkness of the night, listening for any rustle. But there was nothing suspicious. In the morning, there were broken branches and leaves under the tree. This mysterious scene repeated itself every week, but I could not catch the midnight visitor. My father didn't believe me when he heard about it, and my mother said I was imagining things. But I knew that the cherry tree held some dark secret, and it was up to me to unravel it. From that unfortunate day on, nightly visits to the cherry tree became a regular occurrence. Every week I woke up to the crackling of breaking branches and watched from the window as another branch bent to the ground under an invisible weight. In the morning, there were always many broken branches and fallen leaves on the lawn. Soon the tree began to produce fruit of extraordinary size, huge, juicy berries the size of overripe plums. My mother even wanted to send a photo of them to the local newspaper as a curiosity. I vividly remember the moment I tasted these strange berries for the first time. After chewing one, I almost threw up. The cherries had a disgusting, rotten taste. My parents also tasted the berries and immediately spat them out with a grimace of disgust on their faces. Dad crushed one berry in his hand, and red juice ran down his skin, and there was a smell of blood in the air. Mom screamed in horror that it was a bad omen, and the cursed tree should be cut down immediately. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that something was wrong with that cherry tree. My father hired 2 workers, and the same day they showed up at our door to cut down the cursed tree. One held a chainsaw, the other 2 shovels. Within minutes, the cherry tree collapsed to the ground with a crash and a crack. Then the workers began to remove the roots. It was not easy to get rid of them. The pit grew deeper and wider. It took all day to dig out one huge, twisted root. By evening, the hole had grown to gigantic proportions, which made my mother very angry. But we were all determined to get rid of the tree. Suddenly, one of the workers screamed and jumped away from the hole. He was followed by another. We ran out at the scream and froze in horror. Among the tangled roots in the ground lay a blackened skull with bones. Who it is and how it got here is unclear. My father called the police. First one car came, then several more, and by evening 15 people had gathered on our property. The police cordoned off the area around the hole. Forensics began to examine the gravesite and found a second skull. The remains were taken away for examination. A few days later, the newspapers carried headlines about the gruesome discovery on our property. The whole village discussed the case, and the locals began to remember that 24 years ago, 1974, Agata's husband had disappeared. According to Agata, he and his older brother had gone to town in the evening. She never saw them again. There was a search, but 10 years later they were officially declared missing. I immediately remembered the bloody taste of the cherries, the crackling in the night, and the bent lower branch as if begging for help. Whose bones they were and what really happened remained a mystery to us. Since then, 20 years have passed. I've long since moved away from my parents, but those events are forever etched in my memory. Sometimes I still dream of the branches of the cursed cherry tree rustling in the night,